Hey, what's up, fellow slaves? This video is based on this Tony Heller video titled PolitiFact Covering Up Biden Climate Fraud. But before I get into the information Tony Heller covers in his video, I have to say that although I think Tony is a genius at criticizing climate propaganda, I think he's a total moron when it comes to seeing through the false left-right paradigm. Like, he's clearly a Trump supporter, and even the title of his video fails to acknowledge that Biden's climate fraud will be carried on by the next administration regardless if they are a Democrat or a Republican. Just like Trump's administration did nothing to address the previous administration's climate fraud. In this way, one administration's fraud becomes the next administration's fraud, until eventually that fraud becomes so ubiquitous that people can't tell that it's fraud. It goes from being a fraud to being an accepted norm, just like that. This is sort of the premise of the big lie, and that is that if you make a lie big enough, and if you tell it enough, people will just have to believe that it's true. Like, they won't be able to believe that it's false, especially after enough time has passed by. Anyway, in this Tony Heller video, Tony Heller responds to this PolitiFact article titled, "No, wildfires weren't bigger in the 1920s and 30s than today." And essentially, this PolitiFact article attempts to defend the Biden's administration erasing all wildfire data before 1983. That's right. They, the Biden administration and the powers that shouldn't be, erased all the wildfire data before 1983. So, as you can see from this wildfire burn acreage chart that goes back to 1927, the Biden administration, and the powers that shouldn't be, because it's not just the Biden administration, has elected to start their officially recognized fire burn acreage data at one of the lowest points on record. By doing this, it makes it appear like the amount of acres burning every year is going up. Let's look at the PolitiFact article that defends this move by the Biden administration and the rest of the powers that shouldn't be. So the article says, quote, "The problem is, federal officials have known for some time that their data was unreliable, and this year they took most of it off their website." Questions that I have for this statement alone is, which federal officials? How long is for some time? And what percentage of the data that they erased was unreliable? Like, let's say the data says in 1931, over 50 million acres burned. And it does say that. The data says that in 1931, over 50 million acres burned. So what percentage of that 50 million acres is unreliable? Like, why not just have a portion of this bar in a different color to say, hey, this portion of the bar is contested data? Let's look at the two claims given for why the past data is unreliable. The article says, quote, "Many factors made the data shaky." Now the data is shaky. Perhaps the most intriguing part of this story of bad data is that the government's old information includes millions of acres in the 1920s and 30s that burned not by accident, but by intent. On top of that, there is also double counting and, as some see it, undercounting. So, to this claim, Tony Heller rightfully says, why not keep the data and instead show part of the data as contested? And this is exactly what I was basically getting at. So in 1931, when over 50 million acres burned, why not keep that, the 50 million acres, but then show some of the data in like a different color and then like say, this much is contested, or the data is like contested by this much. Why not do this? Why erase it entirely? Of course, we know the answers to that. So the article goes on to say, if you go to the Federal Center's wildfire page today, you will find this message. Prior to 1983, the federal wildland fire agencies did not track official wildfire data using current reporting processes. As a result, there is no official data prior to 1983 posted on this site. So they claim it is not official wildfire data now because they didn't measure it then the same way that they do now. Wouldn't it be great if they did this with the way they counted COVID deaths? All jokes aside though, shouldn't they be able to calculate or account for the difference in measurements then versus now, and just let us know that it is possible that X percentage of the data could be off? I mean, they do this with thermometer data, which I will be covering in a future video addressing this climate fraud. With thermometer data, with land-based thermometers, they've changed the types of thermometers that they used. They used to use basically the mercury thermometers, or just basically the regular thermometers, and now they use like a more electronic based thermometer. And when they made this change, they were able to calculate the difference, or basically there was a percent error, and they were able to calculate okay, this is the difference between our reporting then and our reporting now. It's not like they erased all the data before then. I guess they haven't done that yet, so let me not give them any wild ideas. But, why not do that for this data? Once again, why totally erase the data? So there are a number of ways that Tony rebuts these talking points, but I'm going to focus on just a past news article that he shares and a 1995 Federal Wildfire Management Policy Review that he also shares. And that 1995 Federal Wildland Fire Management Policy Review is from 2001. So I'm just going to be focusing on basically two things to rebut these talking points. However, I recommend that you go and you watch the video that Tony Heller made, and you watch other of his videos, to see the other ways in which he rebuts these talking points that I'm not going to be mentioning here. So the important article that Tony uses that I think others should see is this New York Times article from October 9th, 1938, titled "Forest Fires. One every 3 minutes in 1937 burned 21,980,500 acres at $20+ million loss." And the article reads, Washington, October 8th. Every 3 minutes on the average during 1937, a forest fire started in the United States, but the year's total of losses was considerably under that of 1936. The Forest Service of the Department of Agriculture reported today that 185,209 forest fires last year burned 21,980,500 acres of timber and caused damage estimated at over $20 million. The number of fires in 1937 was 18% less than the previous year, while the burned acreage was only slightly more than half the acres burned in 1936. The service attributed the reduction to more favorable weather, improved firefighting technique, better fire detection, more cooperation by private woodland owners, the work of the Civilian Conservation Corps, and less carelessness on the part of forest workers and visitors. That doesn't sound anything like the PolitiFact article that claimed that millions of acres burned by intent, right? I mean, the PolitiFact article made it as if, oh no, actually millions of those acres, it was just the government doing controlled burns. That's what it made it sound like, right? And if the PolitiFact article was simply talking about fires being started by humans, like basically arson and accidents, well, the same is true today as evident by this National Park Service statement, which says, quote, nearly 85% of wildfires in the United States are caused by humans. Human-caused fires result from campfires left unattended, the burning of debris, equipment use and malfunctions, negligently discarded cigarettes, and intentional acts of arson. That's 85% according to the National Park Service today, and just a couple of years ago, the governor of California admitted that most fires in California are started by people, and here's what he said.
New active fires that have come up over the course of the weekend, the El Dorado, getting a lot of attention because it's a reminder that the vast majority of fires that we experience on an annual basis come from individuals making bad decisions or by simple neglect and accident, meaning 90+% of the fires that we experience in the state of California on an annual basis are man-made fires.
And now the funny thing is, if you pay attention to him saying that, I think he said that not realizing that it hurts and doesn't aid his position on anthropogenic global warming. Like, I think he said that thinking like, yeah, man-made fires. Like, he thinks it, like, connects to the whole anthropogenic global warming fraud. I don't know, at least that's what I got from listening to him there. The next bit of information I'd like to look at is this review and update of the 1995 Federal Wildland Fire Management Policy that was published in 2001. And it's good that this review comes, after the 1983 magic number, because according to PolitiFact, that falls in the time frame of official data. So this review and update of the 1995 Federal Wildland Fire Management Policy starts with this bit of historical context that says, quote, historically, fire has been a frequent and major ecological factor in North America. In the conterminous United States, during the pre-industrial period, 1500 to 1800, an average of 145 million acres burned annually. Damn, that's a lot of acres burned. Just imagine all the fucking carbon dioxide coming from those fires, right? I mean, if that happened today, they would lock down the entire world. They would be like, no, we gotta lock down everybody. Everyone, we have to stop the CO2 from rising and these forests from burning. Today, only 14 million acres, federal and non-federal, are burned annually by wildland fire from all ignition sources. Land use changes, such as agriculture and urbanization, are responsible for 50% of this tenfold decrease. Land management actions, including land fragmentation and fire suppression, are responsible for the remaining 50%. And this makes sense. If the land forest once occupied is now being occupied by urbanized communities and agricultural production, there are less forests to dry up and catch fire. And thus, wildfire burn acreage will go down, right? And it also makes sense that wildfire burn acreage was higher in the 20s, 30s, and early 40s because we really started to become more of an industrial and agricultural powerhouse and a global superpower after World War II, after 1945. Now, the other thing that I want to say here, the important thing that I want to say here, is that nowhere does this review say that wildfires are down because we used to calculate the data erroneously. The other important thing here that I noticed is that this review, which is from 2001, says that at this time that the review was published, today, it says today, meaning in 2001, it says that 14 million acres are burned annually. But the official data now doesn't show any of the 18 years before 2001 reaching 14 million acres. Like, if we look at the data here, this line that the red arrow is pointing to is 2001, and the gray horizontal line that it's pointing to is 10 million acres. So you can see all of this data here before. For some reason now it's not showing, I mean, even in 2001, I mean, that's more like probably 5 million acres this data here is showing. But yet this review is saying that on average 14 million acres burn annually. Of course, this review does say federal and non-federal. This includes federal and non-federal. So is this other data here only showing federal, lands that are burned? Like to me, this is just really weird that the data is so off here. But I'll admit that doesn't really have anything to do with the main point of the video, which is that the PolitiFact article and what the powers that shouldn't be are saying about past wildfire data doesn't appear to hold water. And this is very important because it is yet another example of why we need to reform this government as soon as possible, because they will use this manipulated data to destroy lives and reshape the world as we know it, just like they used other forms of manipulated data over the last 2 years to destroy lives and reshape the world as we know it.